Hmm. All right, it's now officially recording. Perfect. All right, if you are just recently joining, hello. Hi, I'm Autumn. I'm working with the Maine Woodland Owners. We are a nonprofit organization that works with woodland owners to bring them more resources. We try to educate them on the practices that they can do to manage their woodlot, but also connect them with other resources, whether that be foresters or NRCS and cost share programs. But we also like to do a bunch of events and other outreach opportunities with people like Ella and Lauren here, who are going to be talking to us about the ash borer, or sorry, the ash protection collaboration. We have both speakers here already. First, we have Ella McDonald. She's a co-creator of the Ash Protection Collaboration across the Wabanaki, and I might have said that wrong, program, and a PhD student in the School of Forest Resources at UMaine Orono. Ella engages in participatory research with the Wabanaki communities to develop frameworks of care for brown ash ecosystems and data collected in these spaces. We also have Dr. Lauren Gonzalez, who is a postdoctoral research associate with the University of Maine's Ash Protection Collaboration. Um, she earned her PhD in forestry and entomology from North Carolina State University in 2025, where her research focused on the integrated pest management of the hemlock woolly adelgid and the conservation of both eastern and Carolina hemlocks. Her current work involves supporting collaborative research and outreach initiatives to address the impacts of the emerald ash borer on brown ash. This includes coordinating partnerships across regional networks and contributing to the development and implementation of management strategies that support the long-term resilience of brown ash for the Wabanaki communities. I would like to just pass it off to them. I am not as graceful as what everybody is used to, who is Jen. So I think it's best if they just start.
Awesome. Thanks, Autumn, for that introduction.
Yeah, of
I'm going to
course.
try to pull up the PowerPoint here. Can everybody see that? Yeah?
Yep, it's
Okay,
there.
great. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for spending your Tuesday afternoon with us. It was pretty beautiful out for a second, so those of you who came on are really grateful. It clouded over in Orono, but hopefully it gets sunnier tomorrow. I know we're supposed to get a lot of rain this week, but as Autumn said, I'm Ella McDonald. I am a PhD student in the APCA lab, and Lauren and I are gonna talk through the work that we do at University of Maine Orono in partnership with tribal nations across the state of Maine and in Canada as well. And if you've never seen a Wabanaki basket before, I put up some pictures of different artists and their work on the top of this slide. Somebody who we work really closely with is Richard Syllaboy, who's a citizen of Mi'kmaq Nation, and he's an outspoken advocate for ash and really started a lot of this movement of protecting ash's health. Some other artists include Gabe Frey, who's a really close collaborator on some projects we're working on now, as well as Eric Bacon. And as you can see, there's a lot of variety in the artistic approaches of these different artists. Some people make fancy baskets, some people make utility baskets. So that's one of the things that makes this work really interesting. So I will go to the next slide. We already got these great introductions, so we don't necessarily have to do a lengthy introduction. Um, but Lauren and I both take kind of different pieces of this work to protect ash. Lauren's a little bit more focused on the genetics and emerald ash borer management. And I'm a social scientist, so I'm a little bit more focused on working with tribal communities to come up with adaptations to this challenge of emerald ash borer. And a huge part of that is working with landowners and partners across the state. As many of you probably know, 94% of Maine is privately owned, and ash is across all of that private land. So in 2023, we won a grant to do outreach and education specifically targeted at private landowners and conservation groups across the state who own the majority of land in Maine, to educate them about the cultural importance of ash and strategies to protect ash. Because if tribal nations were working alone on this issue, their lands only make up about 1% of the total state. So we knew that we needed to reach across the table and work together to get everybody involved in this effort to protect ash. And that's when we created the ash protection collaboration across Waponahkik, which is a word that means the land of the people of the dawn. So it actually denotes the land rather than the people. I'm sure that you've heard Wabanaki before, which refers to the people. This actually refers to the place. And I've got a map and a few slides that I'll show you guys. So we wanted to start with some basics about ash. So ash is a hardwood species that makes up about 3% of the forest in Maine. And that may sound like very little, but there are some parts that have really large concentrations of ash across the state, or are big pockets of ash. Um, Ash is typically like in the middle band of the state, so not so much in the western region and not so much in the coastal region. You'll still find it, especially green and white trees, because green and white ash, because those were planted in as nursery stock as street trees in cities and towns across the coasts and in towns in western Maine as well. And the way to tell if you're looking at an ash tree is in the wintertime, you can look at the branching pattern. So ash is an opposite branching uh, type of tree, which means that its branches grow directly across from each other. Maple is similar, but if you can look at the bark and the buds, you can really tell that they're distinct from maple. And dogwood is another opposite branching hardwood in the state of Maine, but those are less common and also smaller trees. So if you can tell that it's opposite branching, and I'll show some pictures of the bark in a bit, you're likely looking at an ash tree. And if it's in the summertime or the springtime, you can also look at the leaf. Ash trees actually have a compound leaf, which means that there are multiple leaflets that make up the entire leaf. So if you can see in this picture to the very right, that is only one leaf, even though it looks like it's about 5 leaves. It's connected. The middle of the leaf is that midrib. So all 3 species of ash that exist in Maine are compound. And so, as I alluded to, ash kind of makes up this band through the middle of the state, which you can see on the map on the right. That is a map of basal area of all 3 species of ash. So you can see that it's very common sort of in the Waterville, Augusta area, as well as west of Bangor, and then up into Aroostook County. And so some ways to tell apart the different species of ash. White ash is probably the most common type of ash that you'll see across the state. Its uses include making baseball bats. It's really good firewood. It's a great street tree. It has a very blunt bud, so not a pointy bud. It also has this characteristic sort of diamond fissured bark that's very deep. It's the deepest out of all of the 3 species that grow in Maine. It also has a petiole between its leaflet and the compound midrib. So if you look at that very small picture of a white ash leaf, you can see that the leaflets are kind of off of the midrib. And that's because it has a smaller twig that connects those. And that's true of all white ash. In comparison, brown ash doesn't have any petiole, so it's right up against the midrib. And if it's the summer or springtime, that's a great way to tell them apart. You can also look at the leaf scar in the wintertime, and white ash has the deepest leaf scar out of any of the three species. Green ash I sort of see as an in-between species. It hybridizes with white ash, so sometimes it's very difficult to tell them apart. And in a lot of the data we collect, we just consider them the same category, even though they are distinct species. It has sort of a moderately blunted bud. It has a moderate notch on its leaf scar, and it has slightly smaller diamond fissures in its bark. Um, and it has a smaller petiole, but it still has a petiole. So that means that the leaflets are still set off from that midrib. Brown ash is pretty distinct. It has this super flaky, spongy bark, some call it, where when you put your hand onto it and push in, the bark will essentially recede. It'll take the push of your hand. It has a very blunt bud. Sometimes people say it's shaped like a Hershey kiss. And again, it has those leaflets that are right up against the midrib, and it has little to no leaf scar. So all three species of ash are really ecologically significant. All three species have slightly alkaline bark, which makes them really great habitat for lichens and fungi to grow. This is some lungwort that I commonly see all across brown ash trees in Maine, which is an indicator of really great air quality as well. And there are 98 species of invertebrates that specifically feed on North American ash. So when we're talking about ash being lost, we're also talking about losing those invertebrate species who are uniquely specialized and need to eat or rely on ash in some way to complete their life cycle. And one of those is the Canadian sphinx moth, which I have a picture of on this slide. And I might be a little bit biased, but I think brown ash is the most ecologically significant because it fills this these it has a very unique habitat niche. It people like to say that it grows where it can keep its feet wet, so it can grow in incredibly wet areas and still put on growth. It's pretty shade intolerant, so it's growing in these sites that where the understory has a lot more sunlight, and therefore they tend to be very diverse with different species such as fiddleheads and different kinds of ferns. Um, you typically see it growing either on the side of streams or in like more puddle areas or like boggy areas like this picture on the right. It also has incredibly nutrient-rich leaf litter that decomposes really quickly, and that's what is able to support a lot of the invertebrate species. And in Wabanaki languages, it's called wiskuk, wick, or and there are many other names for it as well. I already went through a lot of these characteristics. Here's that compound leaf with the very small petiole. You can see these leaflets go right up into alongside the midrib. The seed, I didn't talk about the seed much. Some people say that the seed is shaped like a canoe paddle, so it's a little bit wider than white or green ash, which are a lot thinner and sometimes crooked. But brown ash is much wider. And so I wanted to, you might be wondering what the word Wabanakig means, and I talked about it a little bit. So I define it as, and this comes from linguist Roger Paul, who's a member of the Passamaquoddy tribe, the land of the people of the dawn, which includes 5 different tribal nations whose homelands include parts of Canada, Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, all the way over into Vermont, New Hampshire, and all of Maine is Wabanaki homelands as well. The tribal nations that make up this confederacy are Abenaki, Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, Maliseet, and Mi'kmaq. And all of these tribes have consider brown ash to be a very culturally significant species. And that's not only because of basket making, but also because of stories such as one creation story that holds that their cultural hero, Gluskabe, shot an arrow into the side of a brown ash tree, and people came out singing and dancing. So the brown ash tree is sort of viewed as part of their creation story. And I like to show this slide just to illustrate the rich knowledge that Wabanaki communities have around ash. Not only do they have a word for black ash or brown ash, those terms are used interchangeably as common names, black ash and brown ash, but they have specific words for whether a black ash tree can be used for basket making or not. So those are actually considered different things in the language. This is Passamaquoddy and Maliseet language. There are also different words for the different parts of the tree. So there's a lot of like rich knowledge here that these communities carry around this tree. Whereas in English, we typically only refer to it by its Latin name or its common name. And so, as I spoke a little bit about, basket making is a really important activity for Wabanaki people. There are about 200 practicing basket makers in the state of Maine today, many of whom are full-time basket makers. So 100% of their income relies on making baskets. And typically people learn how to make baskets from elders, and they pass this knowledge on to younger people. And there are many different steps that go into making a basket. And at every step, there's different intergenerational knowledge that's passed on. So starting with selecting the trees, only about 5%, 5 to 20% of total black ash trees can be used for basket making. They need to be straight with no knots, growing in specific areas around other species in order to put on good growth and therefore be good for basket making. After a tree is selected, it's felled and brought out and typically processed via the method of pounding, which essentially means using the back of an axe and hitting these logs repeatedly until the growth rings split apart. And then those growth rings that are part of the sapwood of the tree are then smoothed out and woven into baskets. And so everybody kind of takes a different approach to doing this. Some people like to uh, split the splints many times into smaller and smaller pieces that can be used for making fancy baskets. Others like to keep them larger and typically make utility baskets. So I think now that I've talked a little bit about the significance of ash, I'll pass it to Lauren, who's going to talk a bit about the threat to ash trees.
I feel like I have the villain arc now in the story. So I'm here to talk a little bit more about emerald ash borer and its biology. So emerald ash borer is a beetle. The scientific name for this beetle is Agrillus platypennus, and it is a member of the family Buprestidae. So these are known as like metallic wood boring beetles. So they're kind of known for having that glossy, iridescent type colors. And this is a beetle that is not native to North America. It's actually native to Asia, parts of China, Korea, Eastern Russia. And in its native range, it's not a pest. It's call it like a secondary pest, where it only attacks trees, ash trees that are stressed or dying, right? So it has a really important role in the ecosystem there. But because it did not evolve with the ash species we have here in North America, those trees don't have any resistance. So actually, all North American ash species are susceptible, and they will attack healthy trees here in North America. So these beetles are this like really pretty emerald green. I've seen a lot of people actually make earrings with the elytra, the wings, but they are pretty small. They're under a half-inch long, and they're most active from June to August. The adults actually only live for 6 weeks. They, will eat a little bit of the ash foliage. They mate, they lay eggs, and that's not actually what's causing damage to the ash trees. It is the larvae. So in order to develop, the larvae hatch from those eggs and they're going to bore into the tree. and they bore through the host tree's conductive tissue, which prevents the flow of water and nutrients. And so those galleries and tunnels that they create basically girdle the tree and can cause mortality within 3 to 5 years. So we'll try here with a little video. I kind of like to show the invasion history from when it was first detected in North America. It was in 2002 in southeastern Michigan near Detroit. Sorry, it's not the best quality. But by the time they'd found it, really, it probably been in that area for almost a decade before it was actually discovered. And then from that initial introduction point, EAB spread rapidly through the Midwest and into eastern US and Canada, both by naturally dispersing and through human movement, especially transporting firewood, has really helped contribute to that expansion. And you can just see how quickly the spread occurs with this video, which is why I wanted to include it, basically just from the early 2000s to basically most of North America by 2023. So just focusing on Maine, emerald ash borer was first detected here in 2018. And at the federal level, there used to be a quarantine for EAB to like limit the movement of ash wood in areas that had EAB and for those that didn't. But by 2021, that quarantine was actually lifted at the federal level. But at the state level, Maine still maintains a quarantine system that operates by county. So you can see here in this map provided by the Maine Forest Service where we have current known infestations of EAB, and it's color coded by the year that EAB was found in that town. So the 2018, we actually are a little bit weird where we had an infestation come in from the north, from Canada, and then shortly after from the south. So we kind of have two different invasion fronts um, happening at the same time. And so where really a lot of management efforts in Maine are focused on trying to slow the spread as much as possible. And most of the ash in Maine is still healthy as of 2026. And I want you to try to think about Ella's picture of that band of ash right across the middle of the state. That's kind of what we're like tiptoeing against right now. And so, we're, worried because like I mentioned before, that once EAB is in that region, you can see that mortality of ash happen really quickly within just a couple of years. So this figure here, I just wanted to share this. This is from a paper by Nathan Siegert with the USDA, or US Forest Service. And this was published in 2023, and it was modeling the projected spread and impact of emerald ash borer across the range of brown ash. And so what the authors showed was that EAB, by the time this was published, had already invaded nearly 60% of brown ash's native range. And it continued to spread at an average of about 50 kilometers a year. And so based on the spread that they'd already seen, they estimated that by 2035, more than 75% of brown ash basal area will be lost across most of its range. And by 2040, that number jumps up to more than 95%. So really highlighting both the scale and the urgency of the problem, not just, for all of those ecosystem services that brown ash provides, but also for the cultural traditions and livelihoods that are tied to this species. So I just wanted to go through some of the signs and symptoms because, like I said, these beetles are pretty tiny. So it's rare that you're actually going to see the insect itself. It's a lot more common that you'll see some of these signs and symptoms. So the first one of these signs that you'll see is blonding. And this is what happens when woodpeckers are actually feeding on the larvae underneath the bark. And so it'll flake off the darker outer bark as they search for EAB larvae. And when that bark is removed, you actually see the lighter inner bark exposed underneath, and it gives it kind of a blonded appearance. So even though the insect is usually hidden by the bark, the woodpecker activity is a really good early indication that EAB might be present in a tree or a stand. Probably another one of these really big like that is definitely EAB sign that you'll see are they call these S-shaped galleries. So as the larvae feed, they feed in a very serpentine-like pattern. Those are the feeding tunnels created by the larvae as they move through the phloem and the cambium of the tree. This is what's causing the damage to the tree and effectively girdling and leading to tree death. In order to see this, the bark has to be removed. So either you've removed it or it's fallen off from damage from other things. So just a heads up, you wouldn't normally see it. The next thing is our D-shaped exit holes. So this is a good sign, very specific to EAB. Basically, when the larvae is finished pupating and comes out as adults, they emerge after the development, they emerge from the tree and they create these exit holes. And I think it's funny, basically, because they have a flat head, the hole is D-shaped, right? If they were like perfect, it's not like circular like you see a lot of other insect damage on trees. They're also not only known as metallic borers, but also flat-headed borers. And so this D shape is very specific. On an ash tree, that is a good sign that you have EAB, but these are pretty small. They're only a few millimeters wide, so they can be easy to miss, especially if it's early in an infestation. But if you are seeing this on your ash tree, that is a very good indication of EAB being located there. Another common symptom, this is a symptom, not a sign from the pest, but a way that the tree is reacting to being infested, is the production of epicormic shoots. So these are shoots that emerge from the trunk or lower branches of the tree, and it's especially the tree is stressed. And so because the vascular system is being damaged by larval feeding, they're trying to compensate by pushing out new growth. So you'll see dense clusters of shoots along the trunk, really low. Shameless plug here is my son and my puppy next to a really good example of some epicormic shoots from a green ash tree in North Carolina that had a pretty heavy EAB infestation. And then this is going to be one of the last things you see. By this point, the tree is pretty close to the end of its life. And this is going to be the bark splits and crown dieback. So symptoms of EAB infestation, the bark splits are as a response to that larval feeding below the surface. Bark cracks. You might even, like I included this picture here, the bark is cracking and you can actually see those galleries underneath because of that bark cracking. And then usually at the upper part of the canopy, that's what starts to die first. And as the larvae disrupt the tree's vascular system. So the tree can't move water and nutrients all the way up to the top of the tree anymore. And then that dieback will move downward through the canopy and eventually result in complete tree mortality. So if you notice any of these signs and symptoms, especially if you think about that map that we showed about current towns in Maine where it's been reported, if you're seeing these signs and symptoms in areas where it has not yet been reported, we strongly encourage you to document it and report it. So you can actually do that through the Maine Forest Service website. You can take pictures of those signs and symptoms and submit them through their online reporting form. And that's also the place where you can find the most up-to-date map. They're really good about any new infestations being reported through that portal. And you can check where there's current EAB detections across the state. And even if you're in a town where you know EAB is present, it can still be valuable to take pictures and maybe use a different service like iNaturalist to report what you're seeing, just because that's a good like citizen science app that a lot of other natural resource managers might use to kind of track spread and understand infestation patterns. So I always think that just like confirming, getting pictures, and maybe you're like, oh, it's already been reported here, but you take the picture, then you get home and realize it hadn't been, you'll have those photos to share. So what is currently being done to manage for EAB? There's kind of three main categories. There's chemical treatments, biological control, and if needed, the removal of hazard trees. So chemical treatments is an effective option for protecting individual high value ash trees. So this is done through systemic trunk injunctions, usually with emamectin benzoate. And this can provide protection from EAB to these individual trees for about 2 to 3 years. So this is something that would have to be done every 2 to 3 years to continue to provide protection to that tree. So that's why it's usually we recommend for those individual high value ash trees. There has been a lot of effort on biological control, basically releasing specialized parasitoid wasps that target EAB at different life stages. And I know people hear wasps and they get scared, but these are teeny tiny wasps. They can't sting. They actually have ovipositors, which is where they lay their eggs, and they lay those eggs either on the EAB larvae itself or the EAB eggs. And then the larvae will feed on those different life stages. And so there's work going on here in Maine with the Maine Forest Service and one of our graduate students in APCAW, Zoe Albion, who are looking at kind of having an integrated pest management with biocontrol releases in different sites. So these biological control agents are hopefully here would work to suppress EAB populations over the long term, but they do take a long time to establish and spread, which is a challenge with any biological control program. And sometimes, in management, especially if there's a tree that poses risk to people and property, it might need to be removed because once these trees die from EAB, they become very brittle. But we don't recommend preemptively removing all ash trees before EAB arrives. We do want to keep ash on the landscape to maintain that ecological and cultural value. And you need the ash there to hopefully implement some of these like biological control options. And you could potentially be removing ash that might have some genetic resistance to EAB, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides. So, it's kind of limited, but we're working on it. So, given kind of, again, this like scale and urgency that the threat that EAB poses, it's not something that one group can address alone. So there's a long history of collaboration around brown ash conservation. There was a brown ash task force formed in the 1990s and later a series of university-led symposiums focusing on protecting ash for future generations. And through these efforts, there were key priorities identified, including outreach, seed collection, and preserving basket making traditions. So that collaborative foundation continues today through APCAW, bringing together partners and agencies, communities in different disciplines that respond to EAB and support the long-term future of brown ash. So through APCAW, there's a range of strategies being developed to protect and sustain ash across different stages of infestation. So right now we're kind of in this, either depending on where you are in the state, in this like early or pre-infestation stage. And our efforts have really been focused on proactive approaches like seed collection and identifying the current range of ash, along with important traits, especially those tied to ecological and cultural value. In areas where EAB is already established and you start to see those mortality numbers go up for the different ash basal area, we kind of shift to some different strategies like monitoring for lingering ash, trees that might survive despite EAB infestation, and then maybe using those individuals to support breeding efforts for resistance. So we'll talk a little bit more detail about some of these strategies in the following slides. So seed collection, this is one of the most important proactive strategies for protecting ash. One of the key reasons is for long-term storage. So seeds can be preserved in federal seed banks, which is facilities in Iowa and Colorado. And as well locally, we do have a small seed collection at the APCAW lab here in Orono to ensure that ash genetic material is not lost. So typically in the seed bank, the seed would only last for a few years, but under the right storage conditions, we've had seed be able to grow that's been stored for over 30 years, right? So that's really important to collect, even if we can't use it immediately. That seed collection also supports future restoration efforts. They can be used for plantings. Just recently at Passamaquoddy, they were able to establish an ash nursery that can be hopefully a source of seed or ash material in the future. It can also be used for different progeny testing programs. And finally, the collections are really important for research to study ash genetics, including mapping genomes, identifying traits like potential resistance, which then again can be used in future breeding programs. So it helps us preserve ash now, but also supports restoration and resistance efforts into the future. This is a map actually shows where we've collected seed so far across Maine. It's divided or organized by ecoregion, which is important because we want to capture kind of genetic diversity across the full range of environments where ash is growing. The more blue in color, the more ash collection or seed collection we have from that area. Obviously, we are based in Orono, so that area is maybe a little over collected from. So if you're in one of these other regions and you have ash, brown ash specifically on your property, and you want to maybe partner up with maybe doing some seed collections, we'll definitely talk at the end of this webinar. But just wanted to share that, the more populations we're able to sample from, the more likely we're able to capture a wide range of traits, including those that may be important for resistance or adaptation. And I know that we talk a lot about we're looking for resistance to EAB, but we need that genetic diversity for future breeding programs because that's just the current threat. We might find that resistant tree and breed a bunch of that, and then 100 years from now, there's some pathogen. And if we haven't, have enough adaptation or differences in alleles, then you kind of have a genetic bottleneck that makes that population kind of more susceptible to those risks. And again, too, we have a map that kind of tells us where ash probably is, but that's more of a guess. And so we need kind of that ground truthing or people who are landowners to say, hey, yes, I do have stands of ash in this region so that we know different areas to collect from. So we've been working to support this, by offering seed collection trainings and sharing seed collection kits with partners, hoping to expand the number of people who can do this work. And I just want to also add that brown ash is difficult because it doesn't seed every year like green and white ash does. It kind of seeds every maybe 5 years or so. So we actually haven't had a good seed year in a while. So we're hopeful that maybe this year or next year will be one that we can kind of ramp up these numbers. And then another important piece that I just want to also specify is understanding basket quality traits in brown ash, because only, somewhere between 1 to 20% of the trees produce wood that's suitable for basket making. So that have traits that straight grain and narrow growth rings. And there is obviously a role of the environment plays in producing trees that are basket quality, but we don't fully understand if there's any role from genetics. So being able to determine if those characteristics are they predominantly determined by environment or genetics, and then if they are genetic, is that heritable? Because then we want to make sure that that is included in future breeding programs as well, so that there are basket quality trees in the future. Another key strategy for monitoring is monitoring for what people call lingering ash. So these are trees that hang on a little bit longer than all the other trees in the stand after EAB moves through. I want to make sure it's not a tree that is never affected by EAB. It's just, it might be able to live a couple extra years. So it's not really resistance, but more of a resilience. So usually you can find these trees once you see mortality of a stand hit about 95%. For brown ash, it might actually be a little bit lower because brown ash is very susceptible to EAB infestation. So in order to support this effort, we've partnered with the Gulf of Maine Research Institute on a citizen science project that helps expand our ability to find and monitor ash trees across the landscape. So volunteers can help identify early signs of EAB, locate seed trees, and maybe also find potential basket trees for basket makers, while also looking for that maybe potential lingering ash specimens. So we have a partnership with them. And then my last slide, I know I've talked a lot about stuff, but I just wanted to say that, there is evidence that breeding a resistant ash tree is possible. There's been a lot of work led by Jennifer Cook and the USDA Forest Service specifically with green and white ash, but they've been able to identify different, uh, basically genotypes of green and white ash that are able to have elevated resistance to EAB. So they identified those lingering ash, they propagated them through grafting, and then in controlled greenhouse studies, they exposed them to EAB larvae, and they found that some trees are better able to kill larvae or limit their growth. And again, the most important part, that those traits were heritable. So, and then when you bred resistant trees together, that resistance not only is passed on, but can sometimes even be strengthened in the next generation. So it's something that's going to take many generations of breeding and tree improvement. And we obviously want this kind of work to also be done with brown ash. But you know, there is maybe some hope that resistance is possible, and that it can support future populations for years to come.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Yeah. So in addition to all the amazing work that's being done by these genetic scientists, Lauren included, there's some work that is sort of responding to the expressed needs of tribal community members to adapt to emerald ash borer and continue their practices of making baskets. So the threat of emerald ash borer is really concerning. People don't want to sort of lose this practice or lose this source of income within their communities, or lose the connection between generations in doing this type of artwork. And so throughout the course of the APCOP program, we were hearing from basket makers about some concerns that they had in the basket making process, starting with having access to land where they can harvest ash. Often basket makers have handshake agreements with private landowners that when the land changes hands or the relationship changes in some way, that access is sometimes lost, or they've already found and identified the basket trees in the stand and they're leaving the stand to rest. And in the meantime, they may need other places to harvest. So access is a really important issue, and that will become increasingly hard as emerald ash borer impacts trees. Because once a tree is impacted by emerald ash borer and killed by emerald ash borer, it is no longer usable for baskets. So there's some new findings coming out that some basket makers may be able to pound down a few layers and then get to good quality wood, but there's still a lot of unknowns about how emerald ash borer is impacting tree quality for baskets. And then secondly, there aren't many people within tribal communities who know how to process logs for basket making. And there are innovations within tribal communities to process ash more quickly through machines. And people are always going to want to sometimes use the process of pounding ash by hand using an axe. But people also have other options through these machines, which started being made in the 40s and 50s, when basket making was really at its peak during when before plastics and before the potato industry became more mechanized, people were using potato baskets to harvest potatoes. And many people were creating these machines to help them process ash much quicker. And essentially they have like a large mallet that comes down and hits these logs. But many of these machines have fallen into disrepair. So there's a group of basket makers today who are really interested in revitalizing the innovation of these machines and restoring some of them. So that's another bottleneck that we hope to address through our project. And then the third is really understanding the best methods for storing ash once it's in splint form or in log form in the long term. There's a lot of different preferences around this. A lot of people like to have it within its splint form and then store it in the freezer. Other people are curious about what happens if you submerge full logs in water? Can that be a viable way to store ash for the future? And if basket makers are concerned about losing the health of these ash trees, one solution that they're thinking about is kind of like harvesting and stockpiling a lot of this ash so that they can carry on the tradition even if there aren't many trees that are still on the landscape within the next 20, 30 years. And so um, I'll talk a little bit about how my project is addressing each of these bottlenecks. So the first one that I talked about is land access, and we really hope to increase data sharing through my project. And one way that we're doing that is by doing outreach and education like this. So connecting with landowners, helping them understand what's on their land, and helping them, if they want to, get involved in the work that we do at APCA to connect basket makers to stands or to offer seeds for genetic work. And so one thing that we're doing for harvesters is creating a data management system that they can basically go into through a password protected portal and view places that they might be able to harvest. And they can see photos and the different access restrictions that might be on certain properties. And so we're hoping to populate that with different properties where they can access. Obviously, this will be sort of also landowner centered in terms of like what they're willing to offer. And once a site has been harvested by one person, it will then be taken off the map. So it's kind of assumed that once somebody's harvesting in that site, that is kind of their site to steward into the future. So it wouldn't be like an enormous amount of people coming onto your land or getting inquiries like every month or something like that. And so our next objective is to revitalize the pounding knowledge. So these are some examples of some of those machines that I talked about. There are different methods. So on the right is a machine where you actually quarter brown ash logs and then you put them through in this kind of smaller form that breaks apart the growth rings. And then on the left is one made by somebody in the St. Regis Mohawk tribe out in upstate New York where you actually take the whole log and the whole log moves through this machine and it's processed into splints. And so one of the first things we're going to do with a group of basket makers in Maine is visit all of these different examples or many examples of these machines to sort of get inspiration and work collaboratively with engineers to come up with a machine that could be used within Wabanaki communities. Some basket makers are really interested in this being a mobile machine because one thing we know about emerald ash borer is that it is really taken out by the process of pounding. You'll essentially cleanse the tree of emerald ash borer if you're able to pound a tree on site, which makes it safe to move that material back to places where emerald ash borer doesn't exist. So we're tinkering with the idea of having one of these pounding machines on wheels that can be moved across the state by different basket makers where trees could be processed on site. And then the last component of my project is to use participatory methods to collaboratively develop a plan for long-term storage of ash materials within Wabanaki communities. And so the backbone of this work is going to be understanding the knowledge that's already out there around storage. So a lot of what I'll be doing is interviewing basket makers who already have methods for storing ash. And then if they have any outstanding questions, like for example, does it work if you put a really big log into the freezer? What happens to the quality of that wood over 3 years? Is it still viable for basket making? We're going to set up experiments to sort of see which methods may be viable as potential storage methods. And then we're going to kind of synthesize these things, bring them back to the communities, and hopefully the outcome of this work will be coming up with a collective plan for tribal communities and how they're going to store and distribute these splints to younger generations, to elders who may not be able to harvest their own ash anymore. And so there's questions around how can these splints be equitably distributed in a way also that supports people so many people have sold splints in the past within communities, and we don't want to disrupt that way of getting income. So we're also tinkering with the idea of people being able to sell ash through this community storage platform. But all of that will be figured out through these community conversations. Um, and so I think that this slide got a little messed up, so I'm sorry about that. But I can walk you guys through this. So as APCA, we're really committed to working in step with tribal nations, and that includes everything from the management strategies like chemical control, biocontrol, to also creating research projects that directly answer the questions that they have, such as around the mobile pounder. So there's another PhD student in our lab who's done community meetings to come up with like management preferences that basket makers have. For example, some basket makers are a little bit hesitant about using chemical treatment on trees that they're going to be using for basket making, but they still think chemical treatment is important to preserve the species in the long term. So that kind of information can help guide landowners who may be wanting to have these cross-cultural collaborations as they're managing their own properties. And another thing that we're really committed to doing is responding to the questions that basket makers and tribal nation members have. So this most recent research project directly is a response to the curiosities that people had, and we're hoping that we can support their adaptation efforts in whatever way is possible. And then the third bullet, which got cut off, is fostering learning about, or especially learning about cultural knowledge for Wabanaki youth. And so one way that we're doing this through the current project is we've actually set up a way for an intern to be hired through Wabanaki Youth in Science, who will be mentored by a basket maker in every step of the basket making process. So she's going to learn how to select trees. She's going to learn how to process ash and then weave it into baskets. And that is also really useful for the work that we do at APCA. For example, she's going to help us kind of take a look at some of the sites that are offered as cultural access sites and kind of screen if there are good potential basket quality trees there. And so at every step of the way, we try to involve young people so that they're also learning about this cultural practice as we're moving through the project. And so you might be wondering what you can do as a landowner. So the first thing that you could think about doing is inviting cultural access on your property. If you do have, so brown ash is the only species out of the 3 species of ash that's used for basket making. So the first step is really understanding what you have on your property. We always recommend taking really good pictures. If you think that you might have trees that are straight, that are larger than 6 diameter at breast height, and you're open to allowing harvesters to come onto your land, you can send us an email and we will make sure that your information is shared with basket makers and move through that process of figuring out who's interested and kind of facilitating that relationship moving forward. That will probably begin with a site visit from our intern who will screen the site for basket quality trees. And then the next thing that you can do, which is super helpful, is monitor for seeds on your ash trees, especially your brown ash. There's a lot of really great collections of green and white ash that are stored in federal storage, but there's less black ash or brown ash seed that's stored. And also the Passamaquoddy Nursery is putting in a big effort this year to grow out a lot of their ash seed, but they have a limitation of supply. So we're hoping to get them some brown ash seed that they can grow out for their own cultural uses and experiments. And we right now are within like mid-May to late May is a great time to go out onto your property and check for flowering. We don't know if it's going to be a great seed year yet, but we hope that it will be. And if it is looking like there's flowering, we're going to be holding a seed collection training on September 1st in Orno that anybody's welcome to join to learn about how to do seed collection. And we will walk through all the materials and share access to seed collection kits if that's something that you want to get involved in. We would love your involvement in donations, seed donations. And so Lauren and I created a form that lives on our website under Wabanaki Stewardship, which is basically an expression of interest form for landowners who want to get involved in our work. There are many different parts of this that basically walk you through, like what kind of ash do you have on your land? What are you interested in collaborating with APCA on, whether that be seed collection, genetic work, or cultural harvest. And we hope to be able to connect you to folks to move forward to do this research because we need everybody involved in this effort. I think that's what gives me hope in working on Ash is seeing all these different people hear the story of Ash and come together and start working on it together. With that, I just want to acknowledge all the tribal partners that work with us on many of these different projects. Their logos are on the right here, Wabanaki Youth in Science, who we're really close collaborators with, and some of our funders. And I think I just want to give a shout out to John Daigle, who was the founder of our lab. I think he's in the audience today, or he was in the audience, but um, he's also a great person to connect with. And if you have any questions, he's here. So we could probably move into taking questions. I know that we only have about 4 minutes, but thanks for listening for so long.
We do have a couple questions in the chat already. So the first question is from Christina, and she asks, once a property owner joins the ash stand database, who can step forward to claim stewardship harvesting rights?
Yeah, so harvesters who are accessing this database, so it will only be registered tribal members in Maine who can make an account and view this data. Um, so they'll be the ones who are looking at the map, checking out the information. Um, and we need to work through this to figure out what the best process is. So we don't have a ton of answers yet. Also, this database doesn't exist yet. We're just in the very early stages of getting a prototype. But we are likely going to do like a first come, first serve basis. So once somebody has like reached out to the landowner, has taken a visit, that will sort of be their harvesting site moving forward. And they can invite others, but there will sort of be a point person. Um,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you. There is one other that's in the chat so far, and this is from Cami, and they're asking, once an ash starts to sprout from the stump, would felling the main tree help regrowth?
Yeah, I can take this one. So the tricky thing is, I mean, by the time it's kind of starting to sprout from the stump, it's already really stressed. So you're not really going to get that same ash tree back. You can actually, like, there are some people who are who are coppicing ash trees to kind of maintain EAB. So EAB does have like a preference in terms of how large the stem has to be. So what ends up happening is you're gonna like have new shoots, but once they reach kind of 2 to 4 inches in diameter, then EAB can start attacking those as well. Um, so I think eventually you're still just gonna have that EAB infestation there. So like they're saying there's some researchers who are coppicing trees kind of to help maintain biocontrol populations but not necessarily to keep that tree in that location.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to shout out some questions? If you have any, now's the time. All right. Nobody has any questions. You guys did wonderful. This was a great presentation. It was very thorough and very easy to understand and absolutely great information to have.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We're happy to share.
Absolutely. Hopefully, if the recording actually recorded, then this should be posted on our YouTube page for Maine woodland owners, and then you can come back to it at whenever you need to. But yeah, thank you so much, everyone. All right. Have a good
Thanks,
one, you
everybody.
guys. Is there any last minute thoughts? Perfect. All right, have a good one, you guys. Thank you so much.
Of course,
Thank
have a good
you.
one.
Thank you very much.